So I thought, okay, well, we have the internet. Let's see if Israelis and Palestinians even want to understand each other. And as I learned, I don't think they have any interest in learning about each other.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Houston Ensemble podcast. We have a very interesting guest today. We're both very excited about this. We're on episode 35, and we want to invite you to our conversation and watch a conversation with Corey Gil-Shuster. Did I pronounce that correctly?
You did.
Perfect. We found Corey on YouTube. We found his channel, stumbled across his videos, and I thought that they were very interesting. I'm actually not going to give away too much because I want Corey to really explain everything and just lay it out for us. But I think you guys are going to be very interested in what we're talking about today. Corey, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate you joining us. Corey's in Israel right now. He's 8 hours ahead, so it's 11:30 p.m. here for us in Houston, and it is 7:30 a.m. in Israel.
Yep.
Wow. So Corey,
hopefully I'll be able to speak properly. I'm still a little tired. That's okay.
And we're just coming from a little gig that we did. We actually are a band, a jazz group, and we were playing some really great music. So we rushed back over here right after that to meet with you.
Thank you.
Can you just start us off with the basics, who you are, what you do, and, kind of the crux of what we're going to be talking about today?
Okay, so my name is Corey. I am Canadian originally. I've lived in Israel for over 20 years, a lot of on and off, but together it's over 20 years. I studied conflict studies, conflict resolution, and I was trying to figure out how I studied in my 30s, actually, conflict resolution, and I decided to figure out a way to either work in having to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or be involved, because I find it really a fascinating conflict, because everything you would learn in a conflict resolution program, an aspect of it exists in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to some measure. So I think it's a great case study for conflicts in general, whether they're local in America or, between North and South Korea. I ended up getting a job. I work at the Tel Aviv University. I'm the director of the Conflict Resolution and Mediation Program, an MA in Conflict Resolution in English. So if anyone's interested, check it out. Around the same time, I kind of stumbled on this idea when I was challenged by somebody of asking Israelis and Palestinians questions and just recording what they say, unedited, and just to get a sense of what people on the streets think. We all know what the leaders say. We know what the religious leaders say. We know what the politicians say. I was much more interested in, what do the people have to say? Is there a difference? Do they reflect what the leaders have to say?
Are you tired of the government trying to calcify your pineal gland and turn you into nothing more than a working zombie? Look no further, because the Houston Ensemble has now been sponsored by the amazing Epic Water Filters. Tell us what they do, Armin.
Epic Water Filter is the only true filtration system you need. All these other filtration systems skip out on so many terrible chemicals and minerals that are still in your water and that you should not be drinking.
Fluoride, chromium, lead, all these other things that you do not want in your water. We've got water bottles with filters on them. We've got home installation filters. We've even got pitchers. Right now you can get 20% off any of these items on epicwaterfilters.com if you use our discount code Houston Ensemble, all lowercase, one word.
That's Houston Ensemble, lowercase, one word, for 20% off your Epic Water Filter.
So, having known Israeli society a little bit, I knew there's a wide spectrum of opinions on all different issues. And I didn't really know Palestinian society very well. So I had a cheap $200 camcorder, and I just went to the streets and said, I'm just going to start asking questions and see where it goes. And very quickly, when I put it together, I realized that this is really powerful. And so that was 8 years ago. So since 2012, I've been doing this. My questions come from viewers. I am very random, completely random with who I ask. I don't really know what they say. I always have a sense. I think I know what they're going to say. I'm often wrong. And everything that they say, unless they ask me to take out something, is kept, absolutely kept. There's no interview that was never kept. In fact, I've made entire videos because we went on some tangent to a different question, and I said, no, now it's my rule. I've got to keep everything. So I had to create a whole new video based on some tangent that we went on. And that's it. And the idea is to get, like I said, an idea of what Israelis and Palestinians think when it comes to the conflict, when it comes to the politics, when it comes to their societies or cultures or religions, all different aspects.
Wow.
When you decided to start this project, what was the impetus of doing this? What were you trying to kind of discern or achieve by doing this?
Well, it started off, like I said, with kind of a dare that somebody dared me, because there are a lot of people listening to this, watching this, who think they know everything about Israel or about Palestine, and they think they know a lot. And they're getting their information from media. And I think it's a very skewed view of, it's not that it's wrong, it's just very skewed. It's giving you one side, and each media, each outlet gives you a different view of a very complicated and complex conflict. And I wanted to show how complicated it was, and to see, actually it started with that. It was to challenge people who think they know something, foreigners, who think they know something about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and to kind of challenge them to say it's not quite as simple as you think. And then also the idea at the very beginning was to create a dialogue between Israelis and Palestinians themselves, because Israelis and Palestinians are completely cut off from each other since the Oslo process, because it used to be that Palestinians, when they were completely under Israeli rule, could come to Tel Aviv. You could go from Gaza to Jerusalem to Tel Aviv, Haifa, it didn't make any difference, in a car. And with Oslo, which was a path to independence for Palestinians, it cut that off, which is a bit ironic. And then we got stuck in that process for the last 20 years. So I thought, okay, well, we have the internet. Let's see if Israelis and Palestinians even want to understand each other. And as I learned, I don't think they have any interest in learning about each other. So it turns into more of explaining the conflict to other people through the eyes of the people involved in the conflict.
I imagine by you doing these interviews, you've probably realized a variety of type of perhaps misconceptions or biases, or preconceived notions regarding the whole debate. Do you think, and if there are, what are some of the darker sides of the debate that you don't think people are just aware about whatsoever?
Well, there's a lot of conspiracy theory type stuff going on out there. A lot of people who have framed the conflict, and this is on both sides, of people who, I call it the team. There's the pro-Israel team, the pro-Palestine team, and they've created these ideas about the team they like less. And some of it, it's not that it's entirely untrue. It's not a lie. There's a grain of truth. If you really dig down, you can figure out what that grain of truth is. But it has so many layers of exaggeration, and people love. The problem with human beings is we oversimplify things. We need to say, this is the problem. The problem is X, and if we just solve X, it'll be fine. And it's not. Conflicts are very have multiple layers to them, and you peel away one thing, or if you could solve one thing, it'll quickly morph into, you'll see the next layer of the onion, or it'll morph into something else. And that's human beings. So there's lots of examples, but some of them are crazy, and some of them have some basis in reality.
Let's hear a crazy one, if possible.
From who, though? So focus me.
Well, we can either get into the conspiracy theories, or we can get into like the real mainline history. And what to be perfectly honest with you, just to give a little bit of background, I'm an Armenian zero generation here in the United States. So I had to learn English here, etc., etc. So I had to adapt to the culture. So for me, the reason I'm mentioning that is because I think about the parallels between the conflict and, for example, the denial of the genocide of Armenia, right? All over the Middle East, including Turkey, but all over the Middle East. But there's also the denial of many genocides on both sides. Several massacres that are being contested in that region. Yep. And so when I think about the so-called apartheid in Israel or whatever you want to call it, I don't want to get too political about it. I want to talk about the facts. So we can go there or we can go about the theory, whatever you want.
And I was just going off of you, not necessarily a conspiracy, but something, that surprised you or something that stood out to you.
So I knew the characters, and by the way, when I say the characters, it's not just Israelis and Palestinians, because on each side there are subgroups. So let's use Armenians. There are Palestinian Armenians. There are Armenians who are Christian, who don't consider themselves Palestinian, who say they're neutral. There are Armenians who are Jews. There are Armenians who are Christian, but are as completely Israeli, live and speak Hebrew. They don't speak Armenian. They don't speak Arabic. Mm-hmm. So, and we're talking about very, very small groups. So, it's a couple of thousand total. So when I talk about the characters involved, we're talking about multiple cultural groups living in this region. And each one has its own viewpoints, and each one has its own way of viewing the others and how it's stuck in this unfortunate conflict. What surprised me, I knew that all these groups had different views. I always had a perception, because I'm secular, I'm Canadian. I mostly lived on the coast, for example, so that's its own little subgroup, or that's actually the majority, but still subgroup of Israelis. So my example of my surprise was getting to know Jewish settlers and realizing they're actually a lot both more moderate than I expected. I expected them to be much more extremist than because that was my perception. They're much more moderate, and they're very, very, I tell them this to their face, they're very delusional. They live in this illusion of what they're doing is absolutely right, and that once the Palestinians realize how good it will be for them, all will be good. So it's a little delusional. And I think every group is living in their own little bubble of illusion based on what they think their reality is. And similar to American politics in that sense, it's really hard to burst somebody's bubble and say, I don't see it, what you're saying. It doesn't make any logical sense. Because if you speak to, for example, the settlers think that once Palestinians realize how good it will be for Palestinians, because the settlers will create this great economy, they're just going to want the settlers to be there. And if you speak to Palestinians about that, there's no way that they would ever accept that. So everyone's living in their little bubble, thinking somehow they're going to win the war somehow. So.
You have a question? Well, when I think about the Israel-Palestine debate, I'll tell you like this. So the reason I've been following that conflict for a while is, again, my history as an Armenian. And I've looked into both sides. I have a tendency to think that people have the tendency to project a little bit of their fears onto others, or project a little bit about how they're feeling or what they're doing onto the other group. So we see a lot of that going on. So in the early 40s, we know in mainline history, I want to steer away from conspiracy theories and try to really keep it historical, at least at this moment. We know that there were Israeli groups that were trying to find funding or support from other military organizations. In the early 40s, it was Great Britain and we know that there's a little bit of history there of how Israel tried to basically begin the process of settling into what they deemed was their motherland, Jerusalem, that territory, and the kind of migrations that caused by the Palestinian people. I think that was the really beginning of that conflict in many ways, and also the EU's involvement and eventually the United States' involvement in Israel. Is there anything you can say about that history, and what's accurate about that? What's inaccurate about that?
I'm not a historian. I don't even want to really touch that, because someone's going to say, yes, but if you look at this source, sure. I mean, I'm not saying it's not, what you've read is incorrect or correct. I don't know. Not a historian. I've sat in on lots of history classes about the conflict, and I know people who were involved in 1948 on both sides. And I don't have a strong. I'm not a historian. I don't even want to. There's no point in commenting, other than it's very tragic that, and I don't. I would say it didn't start in 1948. It started. Well, depends when you want to start the history of this conflict. Anywhere from 100 years ago to 2,000, over 2,000 years ago, or 3,000 years ago. I think that's another thing that I think is interesting, that every person you speak to, and you get this in the videos, will start history based on where they think it should start and not what happened before. And that to me is interesting, because I might start history at a certain point, but somebody else could start it much sooner because it works for their worldview. And that's my interest. I don't really, I don't know if you can, I'm not a historian, I don't know if you can say this is historical fact, because you get two historians and they'll start to argue about whether or not that was historical fact. And it doesn't really matter. To me, it's more, what's more interesting is the perception of the people. Of and do they know about things? So I'll argue with Palestinians who will, for example, argue that they, for example, did not contribute at all to what happened in 1948, and give them historical facts of how Palestinians did contribute to the 1948 in terms of smaller. I don't mean the armies coming in. I mean, like, in terms of smaller massacres and things like that, because they don't know about that. And I'll argue with Israelis exactly the opposite, how they don't know about a lot of their own history, because each person, we can only hold a certain amount of information, and we're taught a certain story because it suits our narrative. It suits our who we want to be, our identity. So that I'll argue with people, but I'll argue with the people involved, not with the outsiders, because as I always say, I don't really care what people in Sweden really think. I care about what the people here think. I think Israelis and Palestinians are the ones who have to actually negotiate a way to figure how to live together in some way.
One thing that I found very interesting in your videos is when you bring up the religious aspect. And I remember one specifically where you were talking about Jewish converts and they're equated to dogs. Is that correct?
Yeah, so just so you know, a couple of things. I don't believe in any religion. I'm Jewish, but I from a cultural and a historical background perspective, genetically, that sense, but I don't believe in God. I'm an atheist. And I'm not that interested in religion, other than the history of religion. I think history is really interesting, but the actual beliefs, they don't faze me because it doesn't have any impact in my life. But as I learned very quickly, that the majority of people are really interested in the religious aspect. And so I would get these questions about Jews and a lot about Jesus, a lot. And so I said, okay, I'll ask. And it turned out to be some of the more popular videos. So every so often I throw in. So what I try to do is I take the most common questions. This is actually what I do for all of them. So if somebody asks about Jews, a Jewish belief from the Talmud that they heard, if I see it more than a couple of times, then I know it's, people are interested in this. Or if I know that it's some, belief, conspiracy theory, something that's out there that I know a lot of people believe. So then I'll go and ask people, how true is this? So that's what led to those questions. Okay, so go ahead. What did you want to ask specifically about that?
What I feel like I know some of it from what I watched, but can you give us the overall perspective on the people's responses when you ask them that question regarding Jewish converts, and are they considered inferior or not?
Okay, so you have to, again, like I said, there's all these groups, right? So the majority group here, let's just take the Jews. The majority group here are secular to traditional. By traditional, it means they believe, but they're not, they won't keep the Sabbath and they won't keep the holidays 100% the way you're supposed to. That's the oversimplification. And then there's a couple of religious groups. So that's like 70 is the general traditional secular, and then 30 is the religious groups, more or less. I'm being a little general. Within the secular and traditional people, they don't really think about the question at all. On an individual level. That's my experience. In fact, I'm Canadian. I was married to an Israeli. His family, I was married to an Israeli man, just so people don't get confused. His family, who are traditional, they're Mizrahi. I don't know if you know that term, but Jews who from Yemen, Kurdistan, Morocco, that sort of thing. It turns out that a lot of them didn't really think I was Jewish for about 15 years. And so I am Jewish, and because they just didn't think Jews came from Canada. I was never treated differently, and them thinking I'm a non-Jew. I'm a Jew, but they thought I wasn't a Jew. And in terms of conversion, it just sort of like, yeah, okay, I guess if you do it, like they don't care. It's not a big issue. The people it is an issue with might be the ultra-Orthodox Haredi, like the black hats with the curls, and maybe national religious to a certain extent. And then they want to make sure that, because they really believe in that there's a specific way to convert, they want to make sure that you did it right and it wasn't done in some non-legitimate, according to them, way, which I don't agree with their version of what's legitimate, but doesn't matter. So they'll check you out. Now, the rule is in Judaism, once you convert, you are a Jew, period. They have to treat you as a Jew. Does that mean that there are some small, and I would say very small groups, mostly of Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox, who don't treat you as an equal? Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's true. They're not the majority. They're, a small percentage of Israeli society. But for example, they might not allow their children to marry somebody who converted, for example. Whereas the 98% others absolutely wouldn't be an issue.
Interesting. Do you feel like America I'm sure you have some sort of opinion on this. Well, actually, you're from Canada. I'm kind of like thinking everybody's an American culture.
Well, let's see. We're influenced by America. That's the question.
Do you think that this sort of do you think that the religious fundamentalism is more pervasive in Israel, for example, compared to somewhere like America or Canada, or do you see similarities?
Well, there's always similarities in fundamentalism and extremism, obviously.
I'm really saying to maybe what sort of extent.
Yeah, I think in a conflict zone, there is a difference in the sense that in a place, I'll contrast Israel and U.S. and then Canada and U.S. In a place with more conflict, you have more opportunity, or the idea of extremism and taking it to a violent level, for example, becomes a little bit more, I don't know if legitimate is the word, but a little bit more of an option. If you live in a place, then let's contrast to Canada, where violence is not a legitimate idea. There are extremists, of course, but they feel, I'm assuming, I'm not an extremist, so I can't speak from experience, but they probably don't feel it's going to work as much. If you're in a place like in Israel or Palestine, and you see that violence can work at times, and you're an extremist, then you might be a little bit more open to doing something violent in some way. So if that's what you mean, then yeah, absolutely. So extremism, not just religious extremism, but violent extremism, political extremism.
Yeah.
The more violence you have in your society, the more conflict you have in your society. I think. I mean, I have to look up statistics on this to see if there is really a correlation, but it would seem to me, yeah, it would be more. You would see it more.
Are you keeping up to date with any sort of America politics or any sort of American zeitgeist?
A little bit. You hear it on the news.
In America right now, I feel like talk about extremism, basically any sort of tribal difference, really at this point is kind of how I would discern it.
If I might interject, there's a couple of what I would say legacy remnants of the old political Jewish state, the beginnings of the idea of creating a political territory for the Jewish people. And we see that in the form of, for example, the Anti-Defamation League here in the United States. Do you have any comments about that kind of phenomenon here in the West, of like pro-Jewish organizations?
Well, sure. I mean, I'm a Canadian Jew, so I can relate to a certain extent that the Jews have a very long history, similar to Armenians, of being abused by majority populations, and they're and particularly because of not just the Holocaust, but what happened before in Russia, in Europe, the way Jews were treated for so long and abused, they have a hypersensitivity to it. And suddenly you have Jews in the last 100 years, and it really is in the last basically 100 years, maybe a little bit more, where they have a little bit more money and a little bit more power in some way. And so the goal of a lot of these groups is to keep the Jewish people safe, and they've decided that and the dominant idea of that is Israel. Israel keeps the Jewish people safe. Debatable, but that's not actually necessary. I'll get into what Israelis think. That's kind of different, but it doesn't matter. What a Jew in the U.S. is thinking mostly is, how do I make sure Jews are safe, and how do I make sure Israel is safe? And I will, because of that worldview, a lot of the other things that come with it are set aside. A lot of the politics around it are set aside. So it's a natural instinct to want to advocate for your people, to make sure that they're safe, and it's embodied in this idea of the Jewish state of Israel. That's the idea. Now, within that, there's a whole spectrum of people. Obviously, there are people who are pro-Palestinian, and there are people who don't trust the Palestinians. There's a huge range even within that. So,
well, I wasn't going to mention this earlier, but I think it'll be pertinent to the conversation. There was a point in my undergraduate studies at USC where I took a little class. I was curious about what the zeitgeist of like a higher institution system was regarding the Israel-Palestinian debate, but just in general about the Semitic history of these people. And this rabbi turned professor was explaining to the class that, and this is where it's gonna get touchy, because I was gonna ask you, why you said that you found like some indigenous or citizen Israelis seemed delusional. I was gonna ask you why you said
settlers. That was settlers.
Settlers. Okay.
Yeah, specifically, well, look, everyone lives in their own delusions. That that was my perception. You could watch the same videos and not think that. That's okay.
Yeah. But why did you think that they were delusional?
Because they're living. I mean, if you think of the geography, you're living. If you're a Jewish settler, you're living in this community, which is 4 kilometers from a Palestinian village or city. Even you don't interact much with Palestinians. You might see them at the supermarket, because there are certain areas like within the settlements. Palestinians aren't allowed in the settlements because of the Second Intifada. So there are certain shopping areas where Palestinians and Israelis can mix, but it's basically an Israeli area, a Jewish area, and Palestinians can go shopping there. And so you kind of interact on a very superficial level. And so from the perspective of the Jewish settler, it looks like you're all getting along because the cashier at the supermarket is Palestinian, and the people coming to buy chicken in the supermarket are Palestinian because every Tuesday there's a sale on chicken, and as they told me, you might think you're all getting along because might even have sort of superficially typed conversations, not in Hebrew, sometimes in English, and you might think you're all getting along. But because I interview the Palestinians who live 5 kilometers away, I can't say it's the exact same Palestinian who thinks this. They hate the settlers. They have just hatred and want them gone. So that's what I mean by they're living in this sense of delusion. Like you move into a neighborhood and you think you're getting along with your neighbors, and all your neighbors are behind your back saying, "What an ass! Can't stand him. Let's burn his car." That's a very regional thing. People burn people's cars. But yeah, it's like that. So if you're living in your own little delusion because you have guns and power, that seems a little screwy to me.
Do you see violence frequently?
No.
Or okay.
No. That's another myth about the conflict. Mm-hmm. I got caught up in a Palestinian rock throwing thing, and I was on the Palestinian side once. That was 10 years ago. Wow. I saw one other Palestinian throwing rocks. I've seen fistfights. That's about it. I think twice in the 20 years I've been here. Nothing. Wow. I actually find America to be a much more violent place. I've actually had I've seen more violence in Canada than I have in Israel or Palestine in that sense. But I'm not going to hang out in Gaza. I can't get into Gaza. And even in the West Bank, you don't see much violence. You really don't.
Wow.
I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm not saying, I know someone's listening going, how dare you? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I'm there every few weeks. You don't see as much violence as you think you're going to see as someone who's an outsider.
I know you just said you don't want to get into Gaza, and we don't.
I don't know much. I can no. I'm saying I can't enter Gaza.
You can't enter Gaza. I see what you're saying.
I would.
Yeah.
And because I'm not as knowledgeable about it, what is the reason that you cannot enter Gaza?
A couple of reasons. First of all, because of the Oslo process, the West Bank and Gaza, or Palestinian areas, area A and B, and Gaza were given a certain amount of independence. So Palestinians control it. Then in 2005, oh God, I'm bad with my date. Hamas took over.
All right, we're back recording.
Yeah, do you remember where
you asked about Gaza? I don't know if you want to hear a quick briefing. Okay, so Gaza used to be completely open when it was under full Israeli control, and then there was a movement, the Oslo Accords, to create Palestinian independence in Gaza and parts of the West Bank. I and a lot of people were hoping it would be all the West Bank, but that didn't happen. That was over 20-something years ago. And since then, Gaza was more or less cut off for Israelis. Israelis were not allowed in Gaza. And then when Hamas took over, it made it even more impossible because they're officially at war with Israel, and they're very paranoid. They're a very paranoid group. So they don't allow. So if, for example, if I am Canadian and I want to go to Gaza, I need to get permission from the Israelis, from Hamas, and from the Palestinian Authority. I need 3 levels of permission. And even for Palestinians in the West Bank who want to go to Gaza, they also need 3 levels of permission. It's very difficult to get in, unfortunately.
Wow. Do you think that there's a bit of a stigma? So, I understand we have to be careful about this debate, and this is why I'm going to ask this question. So, do you feel like there's a little bit of a pressure, especially on the Jewish people? Like, I can tell you right now, like, as an Armenian, like, discussing certain matters regarding the Turkish debate can get a little bit hairy.
Sure.
So do you ever find yourself in a hairy situation in this debate, and what does that look like for you?
Absolutely. I constantly, if I don't read the comments in the YouTube channel, but yeah, I get people on all sides claiming how I'm a horrible person and I'm just trying to show, the bad side of whichever group that they like. Yeah, of course, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you use. You use a word, it triggers people. That's, there's not a lot. I decided not to take it very seriously. Or be curious about it, meaning I try to ask questions, and it's a good tactic. And I get it. I mean, I also, when people use the wrong word or a word that I wouldn't use about something, I also feel a little bit, offended, because it doesn't just mean it doesn't just speak to the specific point they're making or trying to make. It challenges our sense of who we are. Mostly if you're involved in this conflict. If you're particularly, if you are one of the participants. So as an Armenian, you can probably relate to this. Someone uses a certain, uses the word genocide or doesn't use the word genocide. You're not thinking of the technical term and exactly what that means. You're saying, how dare you not recognize my pain? It means a lot more than that. So, and people, instinctively know this on some level, and then because they have a certain side, or even if they're not involved, they believe in a certain side, they like to hurt the other side. They like the side that they don't like, whoever it is. And it's not helpful. It's not a good idea. Please don't do that. If anything, try to help people come closer together. But yeah, it happens. Absolutely. So it's annoying, and I roll my eyes a lot when people do it, mostly when they do it purposefully. But I just ignore it as much as possible. Because you can't win. You can't win. People will try to manipulate to protect. It's like a psychological break almost. People have a collective identity a lot of times, whether they're Jewish or Palestinian or Arab or Muslim or even if they just are pro-Muslim or pro-Jewish. And if you challenge that, they get very offended, as if it contributes to somehow says something about them, and it doesn't. It really doesn't. But we do. We all do that. It's a human flaw.
To what extent does your documentation of all this affect your job? Or another way I should ask that is, how careful do you feel like you have to be when making these videos, if at all?
Good question. I'm always sure that at some point I'm going to get fired from my job, because I mean, the other side of this, as you can tell from my personality, is I just kind of say things, right? And mostly, if I can introduce a little bit of humor and a little bit of sarcasm, because I think that kind of cuts tension, mostly for the viewer. Not in an asshole way. If somebody was actually victimized, they themselves were victimized, I'm not going to make fun of that. But other times, when people are just stubborn and kind of racist, I remember one Palestinian guy saying he would just never speak to an Israeli, never ever speak to an Israeli. And I said, well, too late. You've just done that in about 5 minutes. And, in my mind, I just think that's funny. That's just, I'm trying to show how ridiculous people are with their, if anything, when it gets to that type of situation, right?
Yeah.
On both sides. I mean, it's equally, I'm equally harsh when people are being hypocritical and being harsh with about each other. So yeah, I'm always hoping that how can I put this? I'm always hoping that we can find ways to humanize each other in some way, and I'll do what I can to do it. Now, in terms of getting me in trouble, yeah, it's okay. I can absorb that. It's nothing big is going to happen to me. I doubt I'll actually be fired from my day job because of this. But who knows?
And have you, and just to be clear, I just want to make sure I didn't mishear you. You are a professor of conflict resolution.
No, I'm a director. I manage.
Director.
I don't have a PhD. I don't teach a class. So
I'm so sorry. I thought you said teacher when you said that earlier, and I was like,
no, director.
Okay, well it's really still all the same regarding occupation. Have you received any criticism
Yeah.
at work
Yeah.
specifically?
Yes. One woman who started working said with us, she said, hold on, I think I know you. She's Israeli. And she said, I think I know you. Aren't you on YouTube? And I said, yeah, I have a YouTube channel. And she said, why do you hate Israel so much? That was her comment.
Wow.
Because I don't even know if she watched the videos, but she saw the questions that I asked. And her interpretation of that was that I must hate Israel. So, yeah, I get this all the time. I don't take it, I just say I don't. And I get this from Palestinians, I get this from Israelis. Some people really get it, and so a lot of people don't. It's okay.
So I want to tell you something, and then I'm going to ask you a question based on that.
Sure.
Recently, maybe like 2 months ago, I was having a conversation with my parents right when the Azerbaijan Armenia second war recently started up again. And I was born out of the first war in the early 90s. So I remember the impact of that, and going back to see my old family home with like thousands of bullet holes in it, and like bomb shells and like destroyed concrete and stuff. And it was a really bizarre thing. But I was looking at all that again and thinking about it, and I told to my parents, and I said, the thing is, the problem here is that we got a tiny country, Armenia, and they're facing Azerbaijan, but they're really facing the people that are supplying the country with all its weaponry. That's what we're really facing. And I was like, unfortunately, I don't think Armenia can win this battle. So I said, what I'm pretty much thinking is that what's going to happen is a lot of political dealing, a lot of contracts being signed, and a little bit of acquiescence maybe to Russia, so that we have the support of another power that could defend us in this case. And like the best scenario would be to create an armistice so that the conflict stops entirely. And then Russia says, okay, that's enough. And then Turkey says, okay, fine. You know what I mean? And when I mentioned that, it was like game over. It was like my parents were very offended. They were like, how could you say that? Then my dad, it was like, don't you think we need to fight? What kind of Armenian are you? We need to fight, you know what I mean? And all that stuff. But then later on, Putin said something along the lines of what I did. And it's like, hey, Armenia, if you want this to stop, maybe you should think about, doing business with us a little bit. And it's squirrely, and I don't like it. I'm not saying I like it. I'm not saying it's ideal, but maybe that's what needs to be, because it's just a strategic thing. So
yeah, and that's what most countries do.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's not an expertise of mine, the science, but yeah, that seems to be what most countries do. I mean, Israel did it very well.
That's what I'm saying. Israel did.
Yeah,
that's what my point.
Palestinians, I feel bad for them. They just were not able, or they weren't. I'm trying to find a neutral term to say. They didn't know how to do it. They really didn't. They're as they put it, simple people. They were, anyways, at that time, and they didn't have the abilities to do that, which is very unfortunate. I wish it had been much more of a level playing field. And so it would be, but it isn't. And so, what do you do?
Yeah, it could have avoided a lot of bloodshed.
Yeah.
And so that's precisely the point I try to make to them as well. And they eventually saw the point, really just because Putin said it for some reason. A high politician had to say it for them to listen. But whatever. And my question is this. What do you think in terms of policy, ideally, you would like to happen in Israel and maybe in Palestine? What are some of the things that you wish they could get done?
Well, I would say if I had a magic wand and I could control the leaders and the people, because it also involves the people. It's not just the leaders, because the people also reflect what the leaders think, really. I mean, I know everyone says, oh, no, it's the leaders. It's the people too. I would want more openness to seeing each other's humanity in the sense of, look, whether we like it or not, we're stuck together. We need to figure out a way to live together. And to be open to that and open to options within that. and not be, and then the flip side of that is also not, because there's all these people probably thinking, you need a one state, one democratic state. I also don't think that's going to work. I think we're going to become Lebanon if that were to happen. Not because I don't want to live next to Palestinians. I've had Palestinian neighbors. My next door neighbor was Palestinian in Tel Aviv. So there's a lot of fallacies around this conflict, that we're completely separated. We're separated, but there's lots of exceptions. My point is that I want people to be much more open-minded and curious about possible solutions and see each other as equals to a certain extent. Meaning, and I don't mean equal in humanity, because Palestinians will say, no, we see the Jews' humanity. We do. We just don't agree with their national, that they want independence. The Jews want to have a certain amount of control over their self-determination. I want both sides to have a certain amount of control over their self-determination. How do we make that work in one small area? That's what I would want them to do. I don't know if there is a really good solution for that, because, by the way, this is not, everyone thinks this is about Israel. This has been going on for 400 years under the Ottomans. The Ottomans came up with very similar ideas of, there's all these tribal communities, Druze and Muslims and Jews and Christians and Circassians, and they all have their own certain amount of independence. They married themselves. They're in charge of marriage and burial and a certain amount of things. So this is not a new thing, this idea of separate yet equal communities. This has been going on in this region for a long, long time. So we have to reflect that, because that's the way people think. Palestinians want to marry Palestinians, and they want to live next to Palestinians, and Jews want to marry next to Jews. Now, I wish people would have peace babies, because I have no issue with that. Marry each other. I personally have no issue with that. I'm not saying this as my personal agenda. I'm saying we have to reflect what most people believe and think. And so but within that, having a certain amount of openness to dealing with each other. And at the moment, we don't. So Israelis who have more power, to give an example, yeah, sure, they're willing to talk to Palestinians. They don't have an issue talking to Palestinians. That's not the issue. The issue is they want to control. They don't like what the Palestinians are saying that they want. That they want Jaffa back and Haifa back, and they want all their land back, and the Jews can fuck off or live under them. And the Palestinians are saying we won't even speak to the Israelis. There's no way we would speak to the Israelis. Why would we speak to our rapist? Why would we speak to our murderer? And if you form your worldview within those parameters, then we can never figure out how to live together. When again, I'll give the example of, there's all these exceptions of, we already are living together in some ways. Again, living in Tel Aviv, and my next door neighbor was a divorced Palestinian guy. People I know live in the same building. Palestinians and Israelis live in the same buildings. There's lots of those examples. It's not the majority, it's a minority, but it exists. Why are we not focusing on that? I don't know.
Wow. And to kind of just give us a gauge, I just want to experience your worldview a little bit more and what it's like to be over there. Being married to a man in the past, what was that like in Israel for you?
Well, we shared each other's clothing, so it's very helpful. My joke. What do you mean in terms of living in Israel, being a gay couple?
Yeah.
Oh, it was easy. I'm not like. Some people say I'm oblivious to oppression, which is kind of true. And first of all, we never lived in Tel Aviv. We always lived in very small communities. We lived on a moshav, which is like living in the country, like rural place. We lived in Haifa, and we lived in Yehud. Yehud is a small town. I'm sure people were talking about us. I don't care. They can talk. It doesn't bother me. And this is in the 90s. This is in the mid 90s. And then we adopted a child, and that confused everyone in our building. And as soon as and the other side of Israeli society, which was kind of fun, is they're very aggressively curious. So they'll be like, why are you two men with a child? How does that happen? And so we just say, well, we're a gay couple. We adopted a child. And they go, oh, okay. Well, we're inviting you for dinner. So
well, that's good. Yeah.
So, and then the other side of that is very interesting about both Palestinian and Israeli society is that when they're talking about gay issues, well, Israelis have come around in the last 20 years, so it's very, very much more liberal. Even in religious circles, it really is much more than it used to be. Palestinians are very conservative, but on the one-on-one, a lot of people are, if you're not related to them, are very open to you as a person, as an individual. There's a big distinction between individual and collective here. Big distinction. So we can get invited for dinner, we can get people saying nice things to us, but if they found out their child was gay, that would be a different issue. So they're just different ways of thinking.
And just for reference, can you give us that comparison to Canada? That sounds pretty similar to how it is in Canada or how it is in the U.S.
Well, in Canada, people will not ask you direct questions.
Well,
they will talk crap behind your back. They will be homophobic, but behind your back. On the other hand, Canadians have a culture which is all about acceptance. So there's a strong embarrassment if you are racist or homophobic, or so that in the early 2000s, that really flipped things in Canada in terms of culture. You can't say racist things. You can't, even if you think it, because I know a lot of people think racist things. You can't say it out loud. In Israel, it's different. You can say racist things, but at the same time, the same person you're racist towards, you might have them over for dinner. It's just a different. It doesn't apply just because you see Arabs as less doesn't mean that the Arabs, if let's say Jewish Israelis, right? And being collected by Arabs, I mean Palestinians. Actually, that's how things are termed here. So I might talk about how I don't trust the Arabs, I don't like the Arabs, I don't whatever. I'll give my brother-in-law as an example. My ex-brother-in-law was talking about you can't trust Arabs, you're going to get a knife in your back, and his best friend is Muslim Arab, and I'm like, well, what about him? He goes, oh, that's completely different. That's the Middle East. That is the Middle East. So you'll Palestinians say the same thing. You can't trust Jews. Jews can't be, they're devious, they're this, but they're this Jew. Oh, that's completely different. That's the Middle East.
That's been my experience, like, in that region entirely. It's like there's something interesting about us is, like, we're very social beings. We're very social culture. A lot of the cultures there have that in common. It's like when it comes to, like, interpersonal relationships, like, we know how to shoot the shit and invite people to dinner and cook amazing meals and, like, have a lot of fun. But then we're stuck on these, like, archaic ideas of the holy war and the political skirmishes and this and that. Yeah. And when the truth is that, like, the people don't even really in their hearts feel like that. And
well, they share both. They have a foot in each place. Is a way to although there's a contradiction. So on the one hand, they'll say they're very accepting, but on the other hand, then they'll say, we gotta kill them. And people just do that, and of course it's offensive to me as a Canadian. And, that's awful. I kind of prefer the Canadian way of you have to bury those ugly impulses, but I have to understand what how these people think. So I treat it in this curious way. So even the same person who might say something really, really nice, they might hide or think at the same time something quite ugly. Often, not everyone. I don't mean it's everyone, but it's not surprising when you hear it here. And when you point out the contradiction to people, they always find a way to cope with not looking like a total jerk. So
I have two questions. One, were you brought up as a practicing Jewish person?
Sort of. My parents, I don't think, are big believers, but I went to a religious Jewish school, and Jewish the idea of being a Jew is very important to Jews. It's very, very important. On a cultural, historical, community level, you are taught that your friend should be Jewish, you have to marry Jewish. It's very important because, you're a small minority, and that's who feels oppressed, even if we're not necessarily in a place like Canada, but you feel this. It's a way of creating community, a way of creating identity.
Yeah.
For sure. So I wouldn't say I was religious at all, but yeah, we went to synagogue and we did all the holidays. Yeah.
Was there a moment in your life where you kind of laid it down and said, I am secular now? Or you
Well, I
said,
didn't
I
consider myself
officially...
religious, but when I was 13, at 13 you have a bar mitzvah, and after your bar mitzvah, you're considered a man. And you were supposed to keep the commandments. That's what we were taught in school. So I decided to fast for Yom Kippur, and you fast for about 25 hours. And I made it to about 24 hours, and then I ate a chocolate bar, and nothing bad happened. And my thought at 13 was a simple 13-year-old was, well, wait a second, nothing bad happened. Not that I was expecting something bad to happen, but it just felt, well, okay, I tried it. That was meaningless for me. Yeah, this isn't for me. And then I tried a couple other times. I went to the Wailing Wall when I first came to Israel. I put on tefillin, that thing you wrap, those leather things, and I prayed, and I felt nothing, felt absolutely nothing. But I tried. I figured if you don't try, you don't know. So,
Yeah.
but that was for me. I never had a believing bone in my body. So,
And what is the feeling like when you're in the midst of all the people at the Wailing Wall? What is that like? Because I would really love to go and see that.
You're talking to a person who doesn't romanticize anything. I didn't really feel anything. I thought historically it's very interesting that this wall, which is about 2,000 years old, if I remember correctly, and then it based on an older building, which is even older, 2,500 years old.
And maybe not your feelings so much, but the overall energy of everything going on.
You're surrounded by a lot of people who really believe, who are praying to God, to the Holy of Holies, which is not the wall, actually. The wall is, I mean, I know that's where Jews pray, but you're actually praying to something inside. But because Jews aren't allowed in there, they're kind of not allowed. They go in, doesn't that? So the whole other complicated issue. But the actual place they're praying to is about 100, 200 meters from where the wall is. So they're praying towards something. They're not actually praying to the wall. It doesn't matter. That's more of just to clarify. So all these people are seeing, if I'm looking at it from their perspective, they're getting closer to God, the closest they can be to God in their view, and to a sense of their own history. So if you were Jewish and you were going to the wall, a lot of people will feel, I have returned home. This is where I am from. This is where my roots are. And there's something magical and romantic about that. I personally didn't feel it. I thought it's interesting, but that's not my personal experience. But that's what I think most people feel.
Yeah, it's very interesting to watch the videos, especially what I thought was really, really different was I believe they wear not all people, but they wear this thing on their head that allows them.
Box, and it has a prayer inside. It's
right.
I'm forgetting all my religious teaching. It's to connect you more to God and to there's symbolism in all these in the way you do it, and in that box there's your head and your heart and all this stuff. Yeah.
Now I'm gonna go pretty broad on you right now, and we're probably coming up on an hour, and we don't want to keep you terribly long. I think it's the weekend for you, right?
Yeah. We'll go shopping.
Based on all your experiences, based on your secular viewpoint, based on your Jewish upbringing, based on everything about you, what is life about for you? What is kind of a meaning of life? What do you see afterward, if anything? Just give us your perspective on that.
Wow. Okay. Good questions. Well, I'm afraid of death, and my biggest fear of death is there's nothing after. And so I would love to find out when I die that there is an afterlife of anything. People, it's funny because we don't really have a strong concept of hell in Judaism, but Christians do, and they talk a lot about, going to hell. I'd just be thrilled there's something. I would just be thrilled there's something else, anything, because I'm afraid of death, and that this is it. So what is the meaning of life? Okay, the big picture is you do your best. You try to be as kind as possible to people. I'm not great at that. You try to leave things a little bit better than how you found them, because what else? We're all in this together. So, why not? Why make things worse for people? Why, what's the point of that?
Yeah.
And then the day to day, at least in my perspective, is trying to distract yourself from the eventuality that we're going to die. And at least, I don't know about having fun, but at least being somewhat, enjoying as much as possible here and there, to distract yourself from the eventuality that we're on this planet for 80 something years. And that's it. And hoping there really is something else. I really do.
Without thinking about it at all, what does your gut tell you?
There's nothing else, unfortunately. I don't see any evidence that there is something else other than people's beliefs. And I like science and data. And every time, I remember as a kid, I used to watch this documentary show In Search Of, and they would talk about life after death, or, people with ESP or whatever. And I was always so thrilled that there's proof, scientific proof. But then you always find out it's debunked by somebody. So yeah, I want to believe these things.
Yeah.
I really do. I just don't see any real evidence. In fact, I see the opposite. I see so many bad people who get away with so much and never get judged for what they do. They're wealthier than I am. They have more successful lives, however you define that, than I do, and it makes you a bit mad. I don't know. I don't see a lot of evidence that there is a personal God who is watching out for us. I just don't see it, and I wish there was. I really do.
Right about in the beginning of that interview, I just a couple. Let's get a little funny here, maybe.
Sure.
Because I was looking at this very interesting picture of what looks like a humanoid of some sort right behind you.
Yeah.
With their hair parted in the center, and I'm seeing.
It's my son's painting, which he based on a famous painting, but he didn't finish it.
Uh-huh.
So that's my son's art, all of it.
Wow.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
wow.
he's
really
an
interesting.
Artist. That one, the person is, and I don't remember, it was based on another painting. He didn't make it up. He copied the painting. He did that when he was 16, I think.
Okay.
And the others are from when he was like 13, 10.
Yeah. I guess my closing thing, I think we've had a really interesting conversation, and frankly, maybe in the future we could continue it, and specifically on I want to get maybe a little more personal on part two. We talked a lot about the politics and other people's beliefs, and I want to know what's going on in Corey's brain. You know what I mean?
Hey, yeah, you can ask anything. Look, my whole thing is, if I'm out there asking really dicky questions to people, you guys can ask me anything.
I like that.
Yes. That's fun.
Well, thank you so much for coming through. This has been awesome, and it's particularly getting in the perspective of somebody that's in the front lines of this and talking to these people. It's very important we have that, because we have to look at it here through a bunch of political filters. We don't have the
exactly.
It's a bit annoying. I mean, sometimes they get it right, and a lot of times they don't. But I say to people, you know what? Come here yourselves. It's and you guys are invited to come film with me. I'll take you around, and you can see it for yourself. I mean, everyone who comes here has a different perspective, and it's fun.
If you could work us some sort of travel grant from Tel Aviv University, that would be fantastic.
We don't. Unfortunately, no, we don't do that. I wish, but no, we don't do that. No, I don't know anything about that.
We'll look into our connects.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, Corey, thank you for joining us tonight and this morning. It has really been a pleasure. I think I've learned a lot, and that was really I really wanted to learn a lot from you and just kind of hear everything and up my knowledge on this. So we're very appreciative of you doing this, and we'd love to stay in touch with you. And obviously, we'll link your YouTube channel, and I'm pretty sure the Houston Ensemble subscribe to you on YouTube, so we'll definitely be seeing you in the near future.
Yeah, anytime if you guys want to have me back, I'm always happy.
Amazing. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Subscribe, Houston Ensemble. Keep up with the videos. Click that
bell notification. We're going to link all of Corey's stuff as well. Let us know in the comments what you think about this conversation. Keep it civil, keep it 100.